From the Glucksman Library at the University of Limerick, Kitty Holland of the Irish Times, in conversation with Mary Dundon, Head of Journalism at UL.
I'm really delighted to welcome Irish Times journalist Kitty Holland here with us today. Kitty has a lot of experience over the last 18 years reporting on national issues on human rights and social justice. She's reported widely on issues like homelessness, poverty, drug addiction, human rights, gay and lesbian rights. And in November 2012, she broke the Savita Halbanavir story. You're all aware that this was the story of the Indian woman who died in Galway University Hospital after the hospital refused her treatment for a miscarriage. This story went viral worldwide. There was a lot of protests about the fact that the Catholic ethos in one university hospital would actually determine whether a woman lived or died. Her story within 3 days got 700,000 hits, and there were national protests throughout the country. She's going to talk to you today about how she sourced that story and also about sourcing other stories of public interest, and give you an idea on how to build up trust with sources and how to develop your story as it's going on. So I'd like you to give a warm welcome to Kitty Holland.
Thanks very much for having me here. It's great. The weather outside. Wouldn't usually come down to Limerick on a day like this, but it's lovely to be here. We're quite tight on time because I have to catch a train at 4:45, so I'm not going to talk for too long because I think people probably want to ask questions. But I'll just tell you really about how I got the story about Savita Halabhanavar's death. I was at home one Wednesday evening last November 2 years ago, and I got a call from a friend, a good friend who is very involved in choice politics, who lives in the north of Ireland, and he had had a phone call from her as a contact in Galway, who was a member of Galway Pro-Choice, telling her that they had heard they had been approached by members of the Indian community in Galway, and that the story she told me was exactly as it turned out to be the case. A woman on her first pregnancy, 17 weeks pregnant, had presented at Galway University Hospital just about 2 weeks previously, that she had been miscarrying and that she was told she would lose the baby, and she was admitted, and after a day in miscarrying or labour, whatever way you want to put it, she asked could the situation be brought to an end because she was very distressed, and she asked effectively for a termination or an abortion, and that was refused, and she was told this was because it was a Catholic country and the reason she couldn't have the abortion. She asked again for a couple of times, 3 times in all over the next few days. Finally the fetal heartbeat expired, and she was brought down to theatre on the Wednesday, had the contents of the womb removed, and was taken to high dependency and then intensive care, and then died. That's what I was told. And all my contact knew was that her name was, she didn't know her name, she gave me the number for the friend in Galway. So I rang the friend in Galway the following morning, and she told me the same story, and she was able to tell me her name was something like Sanita or Savita or Savita or something like that. That was all she knew. And she said that she would pass this on, my contact, to someone else in Galway Pro-Choice because she was on her way to visit her own daughter in England and wouldn't be there. So she said, sit tight, you'll get a phone call from my colleague in Galway Pro-Choice. So I went into work the next day with this story and said, I've heard this story, and but I'm waiting for a phone call on it, and got no phone call. I was obviously quite frustrated about it because it was a really important story if it turned out to be true, and the following day still had no phone call, and so I approached the news editor and told him the situation, and I said I'd see what I could find out just by doing a trawl of the internet, and I sat down, and it was the only tool I really had at my disposal was Google, and I put into Google then Sanita and Galway and Savita and Galway. Was getting nothing, and then I put in Savita and Galway, and up came her death cert. on the RIP.ie website, and it gave her full name, date of death, died tragically on 28th of October, 28th of October, and it for burial in India, and there was her home address there. So I then brought up her house on Google Maps. I was looking at a picture of her house, and I said to myself, I have to go to this house. It's the only way I'm going to make any progress on this. So I approached the news editor and said I could be down in Galway by lunchtime. So before I went, I looked up Galway Pro-Choice on Facebook and direct messaged just the organisation Galway Pro-Choice and said, my name is Kitty Holland, I'm a journalist with the Irish Times, and I'm coming down to Galway on spec on foot of a tip-off I've had about a story that has pro-choice implications, and here's my phone number if you'd like to call me. So just outside Athlone, I got a phone call from someone in Galway Pro-Choice saying that they were aware I knew about the story, but they had decided among themselves they weren't going to pursue publicising it until the widower came home from India, which is very understandable, and they, respecting his time to grieve. And I asked, when is the widower back? And he was due back on December 8th. Now this is now November 8th. And I said to them, look, with all due respect, this story is going to get out. It's not going to hold a month. People are talking about it. Obviously, people are going to be talking about it in hospital, in bars, and I would give this less than a week before this breaks in some way. So if the husband wants to have some control over it, maybe he should consider talking to a journalist how the story gets out. And he said, the guy, that he would talk to his friends in Galway Pro-Choice, and they also had contacts obviously from members of the Indian community, and he would talk to them. And I said, okay, well in the meantime I'm coming down to Galway and I'm going to go to the address, and they said the Galway Pro-Choice people who were based in UCG said they'd meet me in UCG. And so anyway, by the time I got down there and I went to look at the house and talk to some of the neighbours, none of whom knew anything about it, I went to meet them. They had been in contact then with Praveen Halapanavar's friend in Galway, who had made the initial contact actually with Galway Pro-Choice about the situation, the death of their friend. They felt in criminal circumstances. They felt they were very puzzled as to how this could happen. But they were in contact with him, Dr. Prasad, who is a consultant, orthopaedic consultant in the Galway clinic, and he agreed to see me. So the two people from Galway Pro-Choice, Sarah and John, I can't remember their second names, their names are out in the open, it's not revealing anything there. They brought me out to Spiddal, which is where Dr. Prasad is based, and he gave me Praveen's phone number, and he told me the story again, and told me about how they'd been told they couldn't have the termination because it was a Catholic country and it was Catholic ethos. And then I rang Praveen in India, and it was about 1 o'clock in the morning in India when I phoned him, my mobile phone in Spiddal, and I said to him, look, I can call you tomorrow if it's very late there, and he said, no, I'll talk to you now, I want this to come out, I want this to be told. So he told me the story, and again, all the same details as I've been told three times now. At this point, everyone's confirming the details. And he told me how upset and how angry her family were, and how they were completely flummoxed and puzzled as to how someone could be denied what they felt was a standard medical intervention, and again repeated the Catholic country aspect of it. So I spoke to Dr. Prasad after I'd been speaking to Praveen, and he had a copy of her death certificate, the preliminary one, the results of the post-mortem, which had the name of the pathologist and everything on it. And I spoke to him about getting a photograph of Savita's emailed up at some point over the weekend. This was a Friday, and he agreed he'd organise that. So I rang my news editor on the way back and said it all appeared to be true and it all appeared to be standing up, and I would write a first draft of the story over the weekend and So I did that, and on Monday he brought, the news editor got some of the other, got Paul Cullen, the health correspondent, involved, because I suppose he felt he would have sort of contact with the HSE, confirming from their point of view or not. And he did that. He made some calls within the HSE and got it confirmed, basically, though obviously the HSE weren't going to comment on an individual cases, which is their standard line. And we sent it on to the solicitors. So this was a Monday, and we thought it was going to run on Tuesday, myself and Paul. It didn't run because we had to give the consultant at the centre of the story, it was felt, although I had tried to contact her and she was on leave, we had to try harder to get her, and we had to, because it was obviously such a huge story and the implications for her were potentially disastrous, as I think they have possibly turned out to be. But finally got word to her that we were looking for her and that what we wanted to talk to her about, and she gave back the response that she couldn't talk, had to go through the press office, and that's so we covered that. And so it didn't run on Tuesday, and then on Tuesday afternoon we had a meeting, myself and Paul and the news editor and the two of the deputy news two of the deputy editors and one of the solicitors came in. And I suppose what convinced the editor obviously was very nervous about this, because I'm sure you've heard about the primetime case with Kevin Reynolds, and so people are very nervous about big stories blowing up in people's faces, and all the ducks have to be in a row. But the ducks, for want of a better word, that we had in a row were the pathologist report, the death certificate, the corroboration of friends, and very importantly the corroboration of the consultant in Galway Clinic, who seemed to be a clincher really, because he was a man of standing and you would have a lot to lose if he was seen to be, and he was on the record about it. He was
and what was his speciality? What was he?
He's orthopedic.
Orthopedic.
But he was a friend of the family,
right.
And he was considered, I suppose, to be someone who we could trust.
Yeah.
So the husband, I had spoken to some other friends in the meantime as well of the family of Praveen and Savita's, and of course we had Praveen's testimony, and Praveen was on the record. And we made a photograph of her, and we had the death certificate, and the HSE all were confirming that we were accurate in the story. So so the story ran then on Wednesday morning, and as you know, it went absolutely viral all over the world. And I think one of the aspects of it that were so important to making it so, there are a number of aspects that made it such a huge story. There was the human tragedy, there was the abortion aspect of it. But one of the things that really I think people reacted to outside Ireland was the "it's a Catholic country" comment, and I think that just focused an attention on Ireland that I suppose Ireland doesn't necessarily want, but it kind of really made, and I think that was one of the issues as well, that a lot of younger people in Ireland reacted to in a big way as well. The protests after the story broke were huge numbers of people in their 20s who I think were really shocked to realise that this was a part of Ireland that they had not, they hadn't realised was there. Most people who were in their early 20s, late teens, early 20s had grown up in an Ireland of Celtic Tiger, of plenty of all the American stores opening branches here, people going off and travelling, people going off in Erasmus years. There was a sense that the Ireland was, and the young people of Ireland could stride the world on a par with anyone else, and that there were young people from other countries coming to live in Ireland, and we were part of the modern world in every way. And this aspect of Ireland sort of reared its head in this story that really confronted people and made people have to confront a reality about Ireland and the place of women in Ireland in particular. And I think young women I know that since that story broke, that the kind of number of young women getting involved in feminism and choice politics and stuff has increased hugely, and there's a lot more people involved in that discussion about Ireland than there was possibly 4 or 5 years ago. But aspects of this kind of sourcing that story that I would say were important were going to the place where the story happened. I can't say how important that is, and I said that I was actually thinking when I came down on the train and I came out of the station, and it's the last time I came out of the station in Limerick. I'd been down before in the car. Was I came down, a girl had died having taken ecstasy she was living in Clorina. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
It was about 10 years ago, and there was a little short in the Indo, and they just said in Clorina, and I was asked to go and check it out, and this was such a shock. No one had died of taking ecstasy in 7 or 8, 9 years at that point, and couldn't get her address. The local priest didn't know where she lived. All we knew was Clorina, so I was sort of sent down on the train to just go to Clorina and find the family, and got a taxi out to Clorina, and the taxi driver was like, this is a bit of a wild goose chase, and but we went to the shop in the town, in the little village, in the garage, and they sent us up a little bowreen, and we found the house, and there was no one there, and I left a note and back to Dublin, and then someone rang me, the brother, and said, yeah, we'll talk to you, and so I went back down on the train the next day. But I wouldn't have got that story if I didn't come down to Clorina and find the house, and equally I don't think I would have I know I wouldn't have got this story actually if I hadn't got in the car and gone to Galway, because people weren't, the people who knew about it weren't talking until I came down and actually said, you have to talk to me because the story's going to break and I'm here and you're going to have to tell it if you want some control over it. And the other thing was the use of social media in getting that story. I probably wouldn't have been able to track down people without, 10 years ago or before Facebook, I wouldn't have been able to track it down without Facebook. I would have gone down, and when I went to the house, I did find the house, and obviously I got to find the house and the death cert on the internet, but no one around knew anything about it. The neighbours, it's a sign of, I suppose, the alienation of people from their communities in a way, but I knocked on about 5 or 6 doors on the little road in Roscommon where they had lived, and none of the neighbours knew anything about what had happened to one of their neighbours, a week before or 2 weeks before. So it was getting in contact with Galway Pro-Choice through Facebook, and then arriving down on their doorstep firstly was key to getting the story. And I suppose in terms of building up trust, I suppose I didn't have much time to build up trust with them. Maybe my reputation and the fact that they knew that one of their colleagues or comrades, whatever, had been in touch with a friend of mine, so there was a bit of a connection already. But I suppose, just speaking gently and politely, and I'm trying to empathise as well. Actually, when I came down to Clorina at that time, the note I left, I was sitting in the back of the taxi with the meter running and a bit conscious time, but I really took my time over writing that note, and so just, saying I'm really shocked to hear what happened to your daughter, and really sorry, and I think the country would be interested in hearing your story, and I'd be willing to, took the time to write them and carefully, So I've kind of whipped through that very quickly, but I'm conscious I've done this talk a couple of times before, and there's usually lots of questions, so I leave it at that.
Okay, Kenny, thanks very much.
Raphael Rocca, I suppose from your description of it, one of the most key quotes, or a really emotive quote, was it's a Catholic country. When did you have to verify that quote, or did you, obviously you trusted your sources, or did you just take it as, let's say, did you just put your faith in was there any way of you verifying that quote, or did you just go with your gut instinct?
Well, 3 people within the Indian community, including Praveen and the doctor, Chalikanda Prasad is his name, said it, and we did put it to the hospital as well, and they didn't deny it. And we did discuss whether to use it or not. I mean, it was such an explosive quote that there's a temptation to say it was irresistible. You know, it had to be used. There was nervousness about it, but we went with it because several of the sources had said it, and had said it, you know, apart from each other. Like Praveen was in India and Chalikanda was in Spittle, and he left the room when I rang, you know, so they weren't kind of saying it and reminding each other to say it. It was something that, and I didn't prompt Praveen about that. I said, you know, was there any explanation why they wouldn't let you have the termination? And he said, oh, they said it was a Catholic thing, it's a Catholic country. So, it rang true, and I actually never thought that it was said in a hostile way. I mean, it was taken by people to say as an outrageously, you know, nasty thing to say, but I always thought it was probably said in a very emotionally intense situation, very stressful situation, trying to explain to a young couple thousands of miles away from home who weren't Catholic themselves, what, you know, why they couldn't have it. And I actually always thought it was probably said in a kind of just an explanatory, even sympathetic way. So. Yeah, I mean, it was obviously, it encapsulated so much of what the story was about.
Obviously, with your experience, you knew how to approach this story, like in terms of, you know, who to go to and where to go to. Do you think that if something like this had landed in your lap, let's say very early on in your career, you would have been able to take it on, or would you have handled it in a different way?
I think I would have recognised the significance of it. I mean, I come from a background, my parents were always very pro-choice. Like, my parents were very involved in the 1983 anti-amendment campaign at the time. So I grew, and I was 11 at the time. So I grew up with that kind of always kind of on the agenda, choice of politics in the house. So I would have recognised the significance of it. You know, a woman dies because she asked for termination, doesn't get it. She's fairly explosive in a country with our kind of situation. I possibly would have been a lot more nervous about it, in recognising the hugeness of it as a much younger journalist, and I probably would have looked for a lot more help, or I might have even handed it on and said, I heard this, and do you want to look at it? I'm sorry, what were you asking?
Yeah, you had the experience.
I had the experience.
Yeah, you recognised it.
Yeah.
How did you manage the political outcome in terms of the change in the legislation, of the political reactions, and also in terms of pro-life groups reacting to your article?
Well, I suppose I don't feel I can manage the outcome, but how did I sort of react myself to the pro-life or anti-choice, as I like to call it, reaction? I ignored as much as I could because it can be very polite, but it can be very abusive as well, and people are very emotional about this issue on both sides of the debate. You know, both sides see it as a human rights issue, so it's cuts to the core of their very being, their views on this issue, and to get very emotional about it. I have not really engaged at all with the anti-choice side at all on it, because I found that if you do, you're just inviting more abuse. Is my experience of how I've had some very nasty letters and very nasty texts and tweets, and I've actually blocked some people from my Twitter feed because I wouldn't have people talk to me like that in my home, so why should I have them in my Twitter feed, you know? So I think that's you only feed it.
Okay.
Ryan Laughlin, you talked a little bit about being empathetic and sympathizing, and at the beginning you talked about building trust. Can you articulate any of the key things that you do to try to build that trust in order to work with your source and get the information you need?
Really poor family in Dublin, living really tough lives. I always view people I come into contact with as just another person just like me. They're born into this world with the exact same frailties and needs and hopes and dreams as anyone else. And I try to talk to people with that kind of respect, and I think people will really respond to that. You know, I'll also chat to people a bit about stuff that isn't to do with so I'll talk about the weather, I'll talk about if I'm struck that they have a nice cosy house, although you have a lovely home, and you know, just put people at their ease a bit, and really just try to communicate to them that I have no view of them at all, apart from I'm interested in the story they have to tell me. And I suppose that's the values I would go through life with as well. But I think people respond very positively to that and warm to that, and I think that's really how people open up to you, I think.
Katie Anderson, my question for you is, were you able to follow up with the story as far as with the protesters, the hospital's reactions, if they did anything differently, or with the Indian or Women's Choice community, or were you, after the story was released, did you move on to the next?
I followed the story. I got probably the first look at the official HSE report into what happened, and the hospital have not really reacted. They've, you know, obviously I tried to get reaction from the hospitals at the time, and even when, you know, the HSE report came out, but I mean, they, understandably enough, for legal reasons, if you're explaining you're losing in one of these kind of situations, you less said the better from their point of view. So I mean, I've stayed in contact with the story through the HSE, and there was the HICWA report, and obviously the inquest was you know, a huge event landmark event in the story. Vindicated everything that Praveen had said, including the Catholic Country comment, despite the fact the hospital didn't want to call that midwife as a witness, but she came forward and confirmed what she had said. So I've stayed with.
My name is Yannick Farras. You said that you used social media to research and to source your story. I can imagine that there's probably a sea of information on there. How do you realize what's useful and what's
Significant?
Yes, like that.
Relevant, yeah. The Facebook site for Galway Choice was significant. I think you just have to use your kind of common sense when deciding what's significant. You know, what comes from reputable sources, and other, you know, reputable newspapers like, you know, the Indo or the Examiner. You know, it's probably going to be pretty accurate. Yeah. Okay, very good. What's your name?
Kevin Sheedy. I'm kind of wondering, since you published the story, has there been any changes in hospital procedure or like proposed legislative changes to prevent a situation like this from happening again? Or
Well, to do it because of what happens in Vita. I mean, there was a constitutional imperative for them to bring in legislation, but it's doubtful whether it would have happened quite so quickly without Vita having died. And there's been a report from HSE and HICWA which were recommending huge changes in or huge improvements in maternity services. There's a national maternity strategy which is to be rolled out by the HSE. I don't know, progress, I think that's slow progress being made on that, but I mean, there's a commitment to changes. Now, how significant they will be is yet to be seen, I suppose, but there's changes on paper anyway.
Yeah, Kevin is from the States, so he would have been aware of
the
others would be aware last summer. It was very emotional and very divisive debate.
Yeah, hugely. I mean, Fine Gael lost 5 parliamentarians over the legislation, and I think could have lost an awful lot more if, maybe not an awful lot more, could have lost more if it wasn't for, I mean, I have to hand it to him, the skill of Ed Kenny in shepherding that through and making it as restrictive as we could possibly get away with, which also kept sort of waivers on board.
Given the severity of the story, how daring it sort of was for people at the hospital, was there a lot of legal consultation done before it had to
Yeah.
published, and was there much feedback from them in terms of things that had to be taken out or reworded or whatever?
There were things like I had seen a copy of the death cert, the pathology report, and I had to get a copy of that before they'd go with the story. I had to convince Dr. Prasad to go on the record. He didn't want to go on the record. They were the main things, and obviously just turning ourselves inside out, trying to get Dr. Asprey to get a comment okay. So there were things like that we had to get the legal T's crossed and I's dotted. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Melissa.
Mr. Jennings, I was just wondering, do you think the story would have received the same reaction had Savita been an Irish woman?
I wouldn't have the story broken at all if it had been an Irish woman. I think that I know the fact that the Indian community were so absolutely just flummoxed and confused and perplexed and angry about what had happened to her. Like the 40 friends of hers met, 40, maybe about 20 I think it was actually, met Galway pro-choice one evening in the Merrick Hotel, convinced that a crime had been committed against their friend and that the doctors needed to be arrested. I mean, they were that worked up about it, and they'd been to the guards and they'd been to the hospital to try and make complaints and were obviously getting nowhere because they just didn't understand the constitutional situation here. And I mean, it's been said, and I've said it, that if it had been an Irish family, first of all, they might have meekly asked, well not meekly, but they might have asked for the termination, but then, understood, we just can't have that here. And then if a loved one, a loved Irish mother had died, that they may have just gone away and accepted it, as a terrible tragedy, and there may not have even been an inquest. It's I think the fact that there was an Indian community, they were fighting for their friend's right to life, as they saw it, that had been denied her. They saw European human rights being broken here that perhaps an Irish family wouldn't have seen. And I think that made a huge difference. And I do think it made a difference to the reaction to the story. I think that people felt that Ireland had done this to someone who had come to Ireland. One of the TDs I spoke to, Aon O'Riordan, said he really felt that this lovely couple, professional couple, had come from the other side of the world, and look what we did to them. If they had gone to England, she would have had her termination, but because she'd come here. So yeah, it made a big difference.
Very good. Breach.
I know you said that when you were speaking to them, maybe you felt like the story would have broken within a week. But if you hadn't have been contacted by your friend in the north, do you actually think it would have, or were you just very lucky that your friend had a contact?
I think it was lucky, that I got the call, and but I think given the fact that it was, I suppose, the fact that it was breaking at all, and that was probably down to the fact that the Indian friends. I think it would have broken in some way, in some kind of messy way. It would have broken. There would have been rumours, like Fionn Sheehan got wind of it more about a week after I had, but he was on Morning Ireland talking about this woman who had determination, but he didn't have any of the details that we had, So the Indo had a taste of it that morning, but they didn't have. We had the photograph, we had her husband, we had everything, the whole story there. So I think it would have broken messily like that. It would have been. Yeah.
Yes, Robert.
Robert McNamara, similar to Bridget's question, were you worried at any stage that you were going to be scooped, or were you more worried about getting the story right?
Both. I mean, I was fairly confident we had the story right by kind of Monday afternoon, and it ran eventually on Wednesday. Yeah, I was getting really worried that it was going to break because I got a call on Monday evening when I had heard the story was being held another day for more, trying to get Catherine Asprey. I had heard that the Feminist Network were having a meeting in Dublin that evening to discuss this story they'd heard about. And when I heard that, I thought, oh, we're going to be scooped on this. But thankfully, we weren't,
Very Very good. Anyone else?
You said you used Facebook during your investigation. I'm just wondering, is there any dangers that you see attached to using Facebook as a source when you're investigating a topic?
Well, I suppose I was using Facebook more as a research tool than a source. I was using it to try and track down people, track down sources. I mean, if you were to take information from Facebook and use that in an article, I think that would be really dangerous because there's no verifying. You know, I would never use Facebook as a sole source. You might use it as a starting point, you know, or people might use it to get photographs. You know, you do hear, you know, when there's tragedies of someone's killed in a car crash or something, some of the tabloids would go to their Facebook page to get a photograph of them and things, but that might be just borderline legitimate, but no, I would think that would be quite dangerous.
Sorry, you just mentioned about convincing sources to go on the record. I'm just wondering how you went about changing their mind.
Well, I suppose with this, with the actual fact and with other cases, usually what would convince people is that we need you to go on the record for the story to run, you know, and if it's important to them that the story runs, they will, they'll take that leap of faith, you know, that it's important enough for them, and then that's the balancing act. But that was the case in this, you know, Dr. Prasad, I think he would be a friend of Praveen's parents, so he would have a sort of uncle-y type role for Praveen, and he, almost in a protective way, felt, you know, if it means me, because Praveen wanted this story told, and Praveen's name, unfortunately, was not quite enough for the solicitors in the paper, so that's what convinced Dr. Prasad in this case.
I'm just wondering, you said you got so close to contacts and everything, empathise with them, and with the book and everything, did you ever feel at any point that you were getting too close to the topic and that like you couldn't be objective and it was getting very hard to go through the story?
Well, I'm probably not terribly objective on this story. I mean, like my views on it would be very well known, and even at the end of the book I say it was her right to choose and she wasn't listened to. And that would be my stance. But I tried to take quite a factual, as long as your primary aim is to tell the truth, and everyone's truth is different. I mean, there's you know, you can't say there's always an absolutely objective truth. People are going to emphasise the bits that they may suit their agenda. But I mean, everything was accurate in the book. Everything was accurate in everything I've written. No, I don't think I got too close to it. I mean, obviously it's the most important story I'm likely to ever have written, and I will always be protective of it and protective of Praveen and those and that. But no, I mean the truth is the most important thing, and the truth doesn't need to be you know, souped up or sexed up, or you know, it's compelling enough in its own right.
I'm Sophie McDermott. Working on this story, and your parents having such a background in pro-choice, and with the Catholic Church, like their power being so damaged from all the scandal, do you think that abortion, in your personal opinion, will ever be legalised in Ireland, given the circumstances?
Well, in theory, it is legalised now. It is, you know, the protection of life and pregnancy. I mean, and that was the hugely fundamental issue that the you know, pro-life, anti-abortion lobby did not want to concede, was that once abortion was legislated for in Ireland, the whole game changes. Because Ireland, along with Malta and Poland, were in the Western world the only two countries where abortion is illegal. Abortion, once it's legalised, it's no longer about whether it's legal or not, it's about the circumstances in which it's legal. And now it's legalised, I do believe that fatal fetal abnormalities will be legislated for eventually, and I don't know, it may take another tragedy to bring that in, or it may take a woman to take a test case, but I think that will come in. I think rape and incest will come in, and I think it will. It may take 50 years, it may take 15 years, but I think it will become less restrictive eventually. I think it's inevitable. It's, you know, it's women's bodies, and there's people outside telling them the circumstances in which they may or may not have control over it, and I just don't think that's a sustainable situation.
Okay, thanks.
Very good.
Mikey O'Loughlin, you mentioned that you went to the agency for sources and they didn't ask you to comment on individual cases. So So when they were kind of made aware of the fact that the story was about to run, did you come under any pressure from the HSE or the Department of Health not to run with it, or was there any backlash after the article went?
No, I mean, in the initial statement, they, when they sort of said we wish to extend our sympathies to, they did actually confirm that a woman had died, and they said the circumstances are under investigation, and it would be, you know, we're not going to comment any further on the individual case. They did then say at the end of that statement, we reserve the right to take whatever legal action is necessary should any, you know, institution or member of HSE staff be libelled or defamed by the Irish Times, which is fairly. You don't usually get that at the end. That was very much a threat, saying you watch your back because if you get anything wrong, we'll come after you. So there was that kind of threat, but we were, you know, we were confident we had everything right. But I mean, in terms of backlash afterwards, I mean, I suppose public opinion was so supportive of Praveen and what had happened, you know, so supportive of what had happened to Savita, or so outraged by what had happened to Savita. The HSE couldn't really, there couldn't be backlash from the HSE, you know. I mean, legally, obviously, they're going to protect themselves as best they can and say as little as possible and, you know, conduct their inquiries. But no, there wasn't. There was a little bit from press officers. There was one press officer in particular who was accused me of having an agenda, and it was a deeply worrying situation that the Irish media would, you know, blah, 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 blah. But, yeah, you get that anyway, yeah, sometimes. Yeah.
Linda Patozzi, I was just wondering, in your professional experience, what advice would you offer young aspiring journalists?
Oh, God. Gosh, I mean, it depends, I suppose, what world you want to go, you know, which, if you want to go to print or broadcasting. I mean, the print is what I would know about. And I mean, if you find yourself, and I suppose this would apply to any medium, when you first go into a place, have ideas. Don't sit at the desk waiting for someone to give you something to do. Ideas. That's what a news editor wants. They want enthusiasm, but more than anything, I mean, because your average news editor is sitting there now. For instance, this morning, I'd say in the Irish Times, they've got GSOC, they've got the Anglo trial, they've got any number of kind of silly, you know, lots of other little stories going on that have to be covered. And what news editors want is stuff that is new, interesting stuff that isn't exclusive to the Irish Times. Now, we were just talking about that over lunch, the pressure for scoops, the pressure for something to be different, original, quirky. That's what, you know, that's the manna for a news editor to have that. So when you go into a place fresh out of college, read all the papers that morning. When I first started in the Irish Times on placement, we used to have a library where I'd go in and I'd read the Telegraph, the Guardian, the Indo, I'd read the Derry Journal, Belfast. If I didn't have ideas going in, I'd have an idea within the next couple of hours, because there's always things you can follow up in the other papers. Particularly ones, the northern papers. I got some great stories from the Belfast newsletter and the Irish News, but also the Guardian. You know, there's bound to be an Irish angle. We've got so many Irish people living there. So, I mean, that would be the main thing I would say. You know, just be full of ideas and don't be passive. You've got to be active. If they want you to keep you around, you've got to be valuable to them and worth having there.
Okay, just Rose at the back first. Rose O'Connor.
Rose O'Connor. I'm just wondering, you're talking about scoops there. Have you ever been involved from either side in a story that broke messily because of a scoop?
Because of which?
Because of it being scooped, like you were talking about the Independent possibly scooping the on the Savita case.
Of other stories breaking sort of messily. No.
Or even in general in the papers you worked on, from either side.
God, I can't think now. What if they're breaking dribs and drabs? Like,
what have you in mind, Rose? Is it, what's
just like you were saying that if it had been scooped by another paper, that it would have compromised the quality of the story.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose if, say, the Indo had scooped you on it and had gone very vague, you would have been better the next day because you would have had all the detail.
Yeah.
But obviously you would have missed the first bite of the story.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's an example where it could have happened. I'd need to go away and think about that. I mean, if I can think before, but I mean, that's an example where it could have been quite messy if we hadn't had stuff out the same day, which just eclipsed, you know, it was the Irish Times front page that was on CNN and Sky that day. It wasn't the Indo, so we owned it really.
Just the future of print newspapers, like, is there a future, do you feel, or will they become extinct in the next 20, 30 years, like a lot of people predict?
They could do. I don't know. I mean, I will always prefer to read a newspaper than read stuff on screen. But I don't know if that's going to be commercially viable. Advertising is going online, you know. I mean, I suppose, like say from the Irish Times point of view, a lot of the property advertising has gone online, but we bought myhome.ie a few years ago, so that could end up becoming our cash cow to kind of, you know, keep us going. I mean, I would prefer that print would survive, because I just think it's very important to be able to see where stories are placed on the page, you know, how they're judged, how much they're promoted, what kind of space they're given, and I think that comes, you only get that in print. I just think it's easier to read. I think people take it in more as well. I don't know. I haven't given it a huge amount of thought, but I should.
Okay, Alicia.
I'm just wondering, not necessarily in the Savita case, but in general, your career, have you ever come up against an ethical dilemma that you didn't know what to do?
It's not a very hard question.
They're hard questions, yeah. They're a tough audience, yeah. Ethical, I suppose.
I mean, I'm lucky that I work for the Irish Times, where the ethics will be quite clear. I mean, I've spoken to friends who've worked in tabloids and things where, you know, I remember once going down to a house fire where like 3 kids had been killed, and the Sun, there was a guy from the Sun there with me, and he was under huge pressure to go and talk to the family and get photographs and all that kind of thing. And I did think, thank God, I don't have to do that. Like, I just had to go and talk to neighbours and that sort of thing. The ethical issues they haven't come up for me now so much. I think if you're working in, the pressure for scoops and that kind of thing is, I mean, I've come up against it with other journalists talking to people I've interviewed and told them they're not to talk to me because the scoop has to run in their paper first. I mean, there's all kinds of skullduggery does go on between journalists. An RT journalist was doing that to me over an investigation. I was furious. She was ringing people I'd interviewed and said, "You're not to talk to the Irish Times," you know, and they were going with her because she's RTE. But no, they haven't really come up now for me, I have to say.
Hi, Elaine Tuberty. I was just wondering, is there anything you wish you had done differently with the Savita case?
No. No, there isn't. I think, I'm very lucky that it all turned out to be as Praveen told me. Yeah. I'm very lucky he agreed to talk to me. I'm lucky it ran on to, I think everything went as well as it could, really.
Okay. Jean Munsey, I'm just wondering, like, what did you learn most from this case, or say from a previous case that you reported on? What was a major learning that you had?
In terms of journalism, or in terms of Ireland and?
I suppose in terms of reporting and.
Well, I mean, I suppose it really hammered home the importance of not sitting on. I mean, because I have in the past sat on stories. That has happened to me where I've heard about something, and then it broke somewhere else, and I was, kicking myself that I didn't have time, or I didn't follow up, or I didn't make the call.
What case did that happen?
Gosh. Can't be hard to think about off the top of my head, but there have been cases where, and I'm glad I didn't sit on my, I wasn't too tired or hungover that morning or whatever, but I actually kind of went, I'm going to go away now. And I went down, and because, one day or even half a day out, and we would have been probably scooped on it.
But, I wonder, how could you be objective in it, in that case? Do you know, based on your own, your own background, your own beliefs? We all you know, I suppose as a journalist, try to be objective.
Yeah.
Well, it must have been a major challenge when, you know, your own beliefs were involved in this case.
Yeah.
How
Well,
do
I
you-
wouldn't say my own, like, yes, they're beliefs, but I mean, the thing that I would always feel I bring to stories like that would be my values. And my values told me that this was a really important story in terms of what happened to this woman. And yes, you mean you could call that beliefs, but like as I was talking about, you know, how I would always approach people no matter who, like I would talk to Michael D. Higgins the same way as I talked to someone in Ballyrock Flats whose, you know, son died of a drug overdose, whatever. They're just a person to me. And my values would, you know, I think that's a really important thing in journalism, to know what your values are and to bring them into your work and to apply them. And know what you're about and know what's important to you. Whether that's, you know, if you're really interested in sport or fashion or human rights, you know, go with what's important to you, because that's what you'll be passionate about and that's what you'll excel in, because that's what you'll think about even when you're not at work and when you're, you know, going out for a walk with the dog, you'll be thinking about. So I brought my values to that story, and that's, so I think, I mean, I didn't feel I was compromised in any way or not objective. I saw that this was a huge, you know, a woman had died who shouldn't have died, no matter what way you think about it. And that was really important, and her husband wanted to talk about it.
I'm Martin Gosling. I know you were saying when you first started off, like working in a newsroom, which is come to the table with ideas and not being passive and being true with things. But what advice would you give, or how would you say you need to be like what you need to be doing to have that extra edge to get that exclusive, like breaking story, high profile story?
Well, I suppose when you first start out, I wouldn't have ambitions to be breaking big stories or to, I mean, the important thing is to just be working, you know, is to be getting your name in the paper, getting your byline, getting noticed by not only the news editor, but people, you know, above the news editor. But just having ideas, like just, you know, if there's, you know, some big car rally on, see if you can talk to people who are from Ireland who are involved in it, even just silly things like that, just good ideas that would be attractive to readers. And just go about doing that. But that's the way you build up contacts. That's the way you get your name in the paper and get noticed by readers who might then come to you and go, I want to tell you about something else that happened to me in that area. So it's about getting your name out there so people come to you and building contacts up.
And a lot of the time it's maybe like that, the Galway case was actually to somebody who knew you, friends.
Yeah.
You know, friends can be good.
Friends, yeah, listening when
people
you're
you know,
out.
listening when you're out.
Yeah, listen when you're out, listen when you're at meetings. You could be at a meeting about something that's going on in your community, and they could be then talking about some issue in the school down the road when you're actually there to talk about, you know, water taxes or whatever, you know. There's always, it's terribly cliche, there's loads of stories out there, but you need to know which are the ones that are worth telling.
Okay, very quickly now, Judith.
Yes, Judith. You went on to write the book about Savita. How long did it take you? Did that story kind of take over your life? Or
I wrote that book in 9 weeks. So that was, I had a very tight deadline to have it. They needed to have it out last year, obviously. I mean, that 9 weeks, all I did was kind of write, eat, feed my kids, put them to bed, and I mean, I worked till 3 o'clock every morning. I was back up. But it was very all-consuming, and it took over my life. Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you very much.
I'm
It's
sorry
been
I
really
can't stay
helpful.
longer.
Thank you very much.